Imagine sleeping in a frozen plain, where the wind howls at 50 miles an hour and the snow buries the land in silence. Yet inside a cone of wooden poles and buffalo hides, families stayed warm enough to laugh, cook, and dream through the dead of winter. How did Native Americans survive winters that would kill most of us in days? Tonight, we uncover the secret survival wisdom of the tipi, the portable fortress of fire and spirit. The Great Plains stretch for thousands of miles, an ocean of grass, with no mountains to block the screaming wind. In summer, the land bakes under relentless sun, but in winter, temperatures plummet below zero, and storms sweep across like white waves crashing endlessly. To outsiders, it seems impossible that people could live here year-round, yet Native American tribes such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Blackfoot not only lived here, they thrived. Their homes, the Tipis, were not flimsy tents. They were masterworks of engineering, born from centuries of trial, error, and sacred knowledge. Picture this: a conical frame of lodgepole pines, covered with heavy buffalo hides stitched together, anchored deep in the frozen ground. Inside, a small fire burned at the center, and smoke escaped through an adjustable flap at the top. What seems like simple design was actually a system of survival, perfected to balance warmth, airflow, and mobility. Yet tipis were more than shelters. They were spiritual spaces, teaching circles, and living histories. Each painted symbol carried meaning: lightning for protection, buffalo for abundance, stars for guidance. Step inside, and you stepped into both a home and a universe. So, the question is, how could a structure so simple, built from nature's gifts, outperform many modern cabins when it came to surviving brutal winters? When most people today hear the word tipi, they picture a child's toy tent or a flimsy cone used for summer camp decorations. But the real tipi was a marvel of survival engineering, designed for life and death conditions on the open plains. First, the structure itself. A typical tipi stood between 12 and 16 feet high, built on a tripod of sturdy lodgepole pines. These poles, long and straight, were peeled of bark and light enough to carry across miles. More poles were added in a perfect circle, leaning together to form a cone, each one placed with deliberate balance. This was not random; every angle mattered. Too wide, and the tipi would collapse in wind. Too narrow, and it would not breathe. Next came the covering. Before European trade introduced canvas, buffalo hides were the skin of the tipi. It took about 12 to 20 hides, carefully stitched with sinew, into one vast sheet. Imagine the work: each hide scraped, softened, and then sewn edge to edge until it became a blanket strong enough to resist snow, yet supple enough to roll and carry. Once the hide covering was lifted over the frame, the real genius began. A smoke hole at the top could be adjusted with 2 long poles, acting as a natural thermostat. Open it one way, and smoke funneled out cleanly, even in heavy wind. Adjust it the other way, and it trapped warmth, holding precious heat near the ground. Think of it as an ancient ventilation system. No electricity, no machinery, just pure knowledge of airflow. Inside, a small fire burned at the center. Unlike modern houses where heat escapes through walls, the conical shape of the tipi reflected warmth downward. The sloping walls drew in cool air from the bottom, circulating it upward, mixing with smoke, and sending it out through the top. In other words, the tipi breathed. While a log cabin, often filled with choking smoke, the tipi created a living, breathing cycle of clean air and heat. But warmth was only half the battle. The plains were notorious for brutal winds. Here, the aerodynamic shape of the tipi showed its brilliance. The cone sliced the wind like an arrowhead. Instead of collapsing under pressure, the force rolled smoothly around its curved walls. Even in blizzards, the tipi stood firm. Many early settlers, in wooden cabins, poorly built for the prairie, watched their roofs blown away, while native families remained sheltered inside tipis, just a few yards away. And then there was mobility. Imagine building a stone house in a land where your survival depended on following the buffalo. You couldn't. The tipi solved this by being entirely portable. Women of the tribe, the true architects of these homes, could strike a tipi in less than an hour. Pack the poles and hides on a travois, pulled by horses or dogs, and set it up again the same day. What took settlers months to build, tribes could carry with them as easily as a backpack of survival. Still, the tipi wasn't just a shelter, it was a system. Beds of buffalo robes lined the ground, insulating families from the frozen earth. The doorway, usually facing east, welcomed the morning sun and kept harsh western winds at bay. Even the position of the fire pit was deliberate, placed to warm everyone equally while leaving room for cooking and storytelling. Every part of the design had purpose. If you think about it, this was more than clever engineering, it was survival wisdom written in wood, hide, and fire. A wisdom that balanced comfort with mobility, simplicity with genius. But here's the real question. If Native Americans had shelters so perfectly adapted to their world, what other survival technologies might they have mastered, technologies we've forgotten, or even ignored, in our modern obsession with convenience? Step inside a tipi on a winter night, and you'd find yourself in a world both practical and sacred. The snow might rage outside, the wind might scream across the prairie, but within those buffalo hide walls there was warmth, order, and meaning. The first thing you'd notice, the fire, always in the center, always alive. It wasn't just for warmth or cooking, it was the heartbeat of the home. Flames cracked, sparks rose into the smoke hole, and every story, every meal, every dream spiraled around it. Children learned that the fire was a spirit, not a tool. You didn't toss waste into it, you fed it with respect. Around the fire, family life unfolded. Buffalo robes lined the floor, forming soft sleeping areas. Men often kept weapons or tools near their side, while women organized supplies with careful order. Rawhide bags hung from poles, holding dried meat, berries, or herbs. Everything had a place, because in a winter storm, fumbling in the dark could mean life or death. Meals were a ritual of their own. Imagine a pot of buffalo stew simmering over the flames, rich with marrow bones, wild onions, and prairie turnips. The smell filled the space, clinging to hides, woven blankets, and hair. Food was shared communally, ladled into wooden bowls or horn spoons. Elders ate first, then children, then everyone else. Every bite was a reminder of the buffalo's gift, and gratitude was spoken silently or aloud before eating. The tipi was also a classroom. Children learned not from books, but from listening. At night, elders told stories: the coyote who tricked the world, the eagle who carried prayers, the star woman who fell to earth. These stories weren't entertainment. They were moral codes, lessons in survival, and reminders of the unseen forces around them. Imagine lying under glowing hides, snow pressing down outside, while hearing about spirits that walked between worlds. For a child, the tipi wasn't just home, it was the universe itself. But life wasn't only stories and meals. Rituals marked the rhythm of the seasons. Some tipis held sacred bundles, wrapped objects containing feathers, stones, or medicines passed down through generations. Opening such a bundle was rare, done only with ceremony, and the whole household treated the space as holy. Even the walls spoke. Many tipis were painted with symbols, stars, or hunting scenes. These weren't decoration. They were prayers made visible, protection written on hide. When the storm hit, families could look up and see their guardians drawn above them. And then there was the social life. Neighbors often visited, slipping through the low doorway with a greeting. Conversations circled the fire, news of hunts, decisions about travel, or simply laughter in the dark. The tipi could be small, but it carried a sense of openness, of community. Privacy, as we think of it today, hardly existed, but connection did. At night, the sounds told their own stories: the whistle of wind against hides, the steady crackle of the fire, the breathing of family members curled under robes. Sometimes, distant drums or flutes echoed from another lodge across camp, reminding everyone they were part of something larger than themselves. This was daily life, not easy, but deeply rooted in rhythm and meaning. Every task had purpose. Every story carried weight. Every ritual tied the living to the ancestors, and the ancestors to the land. Now imagine this. Surviving wasn't only about warmth and food. It was also about spirit. Because without hope, without story, without belief, what good was a fire against the endless winter? So here's the question. Was it the engineering of the tipi that kept native families alive? Or was it the culture, the rituals, the unseen threads of spirit woven into every moment within those walls? The tipi was warm, it was sacred, but it was never safe. Out on the Great Plains, danger came not only from blizzards and starvation, but from rival tribes, raids, and the constant struggle to protect land and family. Survival in winter demanded more than fire and buffalo robes. It demanded weapons, strategy, and courage. Inside every tipi, tools of war rested just an arm's reach away. A bow leaned against a pole, arrows in a quiver wrapped in fur to keep them dry. Spears lay near the door, ready to be carried out at the first warning shout. Even war clubs, carved from hardwood and weighted with stone, were stored carefully among the daily objects of family life. The bow and arrow was the heart of native warfare. A hunter's weapon became a warrior's shield. Bows were often made of ash, chokecherry, or elk horn, strung with sinew. Arrows tipped with flint or obsidian could pierce hide and bone even through layers of fur. In the stillness of winter, when sound carried far, a well-placed arrow meant the difference between life and death. But battles in winter were rare luxuries. Most tribes avoided full-scale war during the cold months because resources were scarce and every life was precious. Instead, raids became the strategist's swift strikes on rival camps to capture horses, reclaim stolen food, or prove bravery. Horses, especially, were lifelines. Without them, a tribe's mobility, hunting power, and ability to transport tipis crumbled. That's why midnight raids on horse herds were some of the most dangerous and heroic missions a warrior could take. Imagine it. A young warrior crawling across snow, breath clouding in the moonlight, fingers frozen to his bowstring. He waits for the right moment, then drives the herd into chaos, leaping bareback onto a stolen horse and vanishing into the dark. In those moments, silence was as much a weapon as any arrow. And yet, defense mattered too. The circle of tipis in a camp was more than convenient design, it was strategy. Families placed their lodges in a protective ring, entrances facing inward. In the center, fire pits, council areas, and the beating heart of the people. To attack a camp, an enemy had to break through this living shield. Every tipi was both a home and a wall. Every warrior inside ready to burst forth. But warfare wasn't only about steel and sinew. It was also about spirit. Before battle, warriors painted their faces with red for courage, black for victory, or white for protection. Songs were sung, drums beat, and prayers carried smoke upward through tipi flaps into the night sky. They believed weapons alone did not win battles, spirits did. And the tipi was part of that power. A place where warriors prepared themselves not only in body, but in soul. Even in death, warfare shaped life inside the tipi. Stories of fallen warriors were told around the fire. Their names, their deeds, their bravery were spoken aloud so that children would carry them forward. To live in a tipi was to share space not only with the living, but with the memory of the dead. And here lies the paradox. The same walls that sheltered babies in buffalo robes also stored war clubs and arrows. The tipi was a cradle of life and a fortress of survival. But think about this: if the Plains tribes could adapt their homes into both sacred sanctuaries and bases of defense. What other parts of their daily lives doubled as tools of survival, hidden in plain sight. To understand how Native Americans survived the brutal winters of the Great Plains, you can't just look at the tipi. You have to look at the animals, because every hide, every feather, every story painted on those lodge walls came from a deep connection with the creatures of the land. The buffalo was the greatest of them all. Without it, there would be no tipis, no warm robes, no food in the dead of winter. Buffalo hides covered the lodges, thick enough to block the icy wind. Their meat pounded into pemmican with berries and fat provided energy that lasted for months. Their bones became needles, tools, and weapons. Their sinew turned into bowstrings and thread. To Native families, the buffalo was not just an animal, it was a nation, a gift of survival. Elders called it the walking storehouse. But buffalo were more than resources. They were spiritual guides. Some tribes believed that when you dreamed of a buffalo, you were being reminded to stay strong and endure hardship. Painted on the walls of Tipis, the buffalo symbolized abundance and protection, a guardian against the long hunger of winter. Above the plains, the eagle soared. Its feathers decorated sacred bundles, war bonnets, and ceremonial staffs. Eagles were seen as messengers to the Great Spirit, able to carry prayers from the smoke of the tipi fires into the heavens. In times of war or famine, spotting an eagle could be a sign of courage and hope. Inside the tipi, an eagle feather wasn't decoration, it was power, honor, and responsibility. Then came the wolf. Unlike buffalo or eagle, the wolf lived close to the human world, stalking herds, hunting in packs, enduring the same freezing winds. Warriors studied wolves for tactics, how they moved silently, how they circled prey, how they survived when the snow was deep. Families told stories of wolf as both teacher and trickster, a spirit who reminded humans to stay clever and united. Some warriors even carried wolf pelts to channel its endurance in battle. And of course, the bear. In winter, while humans struggled against storms, the bear disappeared into hibernation only to rise again in spring. Too many tribes, this was a sacred mystery, proof of power over death itself. Bear claws and skins were prized in ceremonies, symbols of strength and healing. Medicine men wore bear parts in rituals, believing the spirit of the animal could guide them to cure sickness. In the quiet of the tipi, prayers to bear spirit often asked for resilience, for the courage to face illness or grief. What's remarkable is how this web of animal connections lived side by side with daily survival. A child wrapped in a buffalo robe knew warmth, but also story. A warrior wearing a wolf pelt knew protection, but also identity. Every feather, claw, and hide was more than material, it was meaning. Think about modern times. We put up posters of athletes or superheroes, but inside a tipi, families lived under symbols of eagle, wolf, and buffalo, the real superheroes of the plains. These weren't decorations. They were spiritual contracts, reminders that humans were not separate from nature, but part of its circle. And here's the key. These animal connections weren't passive beliefs. They directly shaped how people acted. Hunters prayed before a buffalo hunt, asking permission. Warriors sang to eagle feathers before battle. Mothers told wolf stories to teach children bravery in the dark. The tipi wasn't just a house, it was a living classroom where the animals of the plains spoke through symbol, ritual, and survival. But that leads us to a deeper question. If Native Americans saw animals not as resources, but as relatives, how did that worldview change the way they faced winter itself, and what lessons might we, in our modern age of disconnection, have forgotten? To an outsider, the tipi was just wood and hide, but to the people who lived within its walls, it was a living symbol, a mirror of the universe, built from both earth and sky. The conical shape itself carried meaning. Many tribes saw it as the shape of a mountain, a bridge between the human world and the spirit world. Its base touched the earth, where families sat, cooked, and slept. Its peak opened toward the heavens, letting smoke rise to the great spirit above. Each fire carried prayers upward, woven into the breath of the tipi itself. Even the doorway had meaning. Most tipis faced east, toward the rising sun. Each morning, as light poured through the entrance, families were reminded of renewal, of the cycle of life. To wake in a tipi was to wake with the world, aligned with forces greater than oneself. Inside, the structure became sacred space. The circle of poles was not random, it represented the circle of life, the seasons, the endless wheel of time. Elders told children, what happens in the circle comes back again. Death led to life, winter led to spring, sorrow led to healing, and the tipi, circular at its base, was a constant reminder of that truth. Stories linked directly to these beliefs. Among the Lakota, one teaching told of white buffalo calf woman who brought the sacred pipe and taught the people how to live in harmony. Her wisdom was tied to the lodge, where smoke carried prayers to the sky, just as the pipe carried prayers to the Creator. The tipi became a sacred echo of that gift. Some believed spirits themselves dwelled within. The fire was more than phlegm, it was a living being. The poles were more than wood, they were the bones of a protector. Even the hide covering was seen as the skin of an animal spirit, embracing the family within. To step into a tipi was to step into a body of the sacred, wrapped in warmth and mystery. Symbols painted on the walls carried mythic power. Stars mapped the heavens. Lightning bolts called down protection. Animal forms, like buffalo or eagle, tied the family to their guardians. These were not casual decorations. They were living prayers, activated each time the family gathered, sang, or dreamed beneath them. Dreams, too, played a role. In the silence of winter nights, people believed dreams carried messages from ancestors or animal spirits. A child who dreamed of an eagle might be destined to lead. A warrior who dreamed of bear might be given healing power. And where were these dreams most vivid? Inside the tipi, under the glowing hides, where the human world touched the spirit world with every flicker of flame. Even death itself returned to the tipi. Some tribes held wakes inside lodges, where songs guided the soul's journey. The tipi became a vessel of passage, just as it was a vessel of birth. In this way, it carried the living and the dead alike through the circle of life. What makes this so striking is how survival and spirituality were inseparable. The fire that cooked meat was also the spirit's voice. The hides that kept out snow were also sacred skins. The structure that sheltered families from storms was also a cosmic map. For Native Americans, there was no dividing line. Life, survival, and spirit were one. So here's the haunting thought. While we see the tipi as clever engineering, they saw it as the universe itself. Which raises a question: did their survival come from the design alone, or from the belief that every storm, every fire, every night under the hides was part of something eternal? The tipi was more than a house, it was a passport, a structure designed not to stay in one place, but to move with the rhythms of the land. For native tribes of the Great Plains, survival meant following the seasons, chasing the herds, and knowing when to leave before the land itself turned against you. In summer, camps spread wide across the prairie. Tipis were lifted high, flaps open, smoke holes wide. Breezes flowed through, carrying away heat. Families dried meat in the sun, tanned hides, and gathered plants. Horses grazed freely, and laughter echoed across the open grass. In this season, the tipi became a shade, a cool refuge against the punishing sun. But autumn brought change. The buffalo began their great migrations, and with them, the tribes moved. Tipis were struck, quickly poles bundled into a travois, hides rolled tight. Within hours, what looked like a village vanished, leaving only faint circles pressed into grass. Mobility wasn't a luxury. It was survival. If you stayed behind when the herds moved, winter would catch you with nothing to eat. When the first snow fell, Tipis became winter fortresses. Camps tightened, with lodges clustered close together, offering mutual protection against wind and raiders. Fires burned day and night, fueled by carefully gathered wood. Smoke curled into the frozen sky as families huddled inside, waiting out the longest nights. Buffalo hides, thicker in winter, insulated the walls, while robes layered the floors. Here, endurance was everything. Spring meant renewal. Streams thawed, plants returned, and camps shifted again. Families moved closer to rivers, where fresh water and new grass drew the herds. Children gathered early shoots and roots, while elders sang songs of thanks to the land's awakening. The Tipis, once heavy with snow, now opened wide again, breathing with the earth's return. What made this cycle extraordinary was the speed and efficiency of movement. A skilled group of women could dismantle a tipi in under an hour. The poles were dragged by horses, forming the famous travois that carried hides and supplies. Dogs, too, pulled smaller loads before horses were common. With every migration, the entire camp flowed like a river across the plains, hundreds of lodges rising and falling with the seasons. This mobility wasn't random. It was guided by deep knowledge of land and sky. Elders read the stars, the winds, and the movements of animals. They knew which valleys caught less snow, which rivers froze last, which hills offered the best shelter. Their wisdom turned the tipi into more than a home. It was part of a grand choreography between humans, animals, and Earth itself. Contrast this with settlers' cabins. Fixed in place, they often became traps in winter, cut off from resources, unable to move with herds or storms. Many starved, while native families, their lives woven to the rhythm of the land, endured. The tipi was not weaker than a house. It was stronger, because it was free. But there was another layer, spiritual migration. Moving with the seasons wasn't just about food or shelter. It was ceremony. Each shift marked the turning of the sacred wheel of life. Camps gathered for summer dances, broke apart for winter hunts, and reunited with spring. The tipi was both tent and temple, always rising where the people needed it, always facing east to greet the dawn. Think about this. In our modern world, we build permanent walls and force the land to bend around us. But Native Americans built homes that bent with the land, flowing like the rivers, cycling with the herds, breathing with the seasons. So the question is, was there strength in the hide and pole, or in the wisdom to move when the land itself whispered, "It is time"? When we look at the tipi today, it's tempting to see it only as history, something beautiful but gone, a museum piece. But the truth is, the lessons of the tipi are more relevant now than ever. In an age of climate change, housing crises, and disconnection from nature, the wisdom of this ancient tent may be exactly what we've forgotten. First, energy. The tipi used nothing but natural materials: wood, hide, fire, and yet it regulated heat, air, and light better than many modern homes. No furnace, no insulation foam, no thermostat, just design. Today, architects study the airflow of the tipi for inspiration in sustainable housing. Imagine if our skyscrapers breathed as naturally as those buffalo hide lodges. How much energy would we save? How much cleaner would our air be? Second, mobility. We live in a world where we chain ourselves to fixed houses, fixed mortgages, fixed jobs. The tipi reminds us that survival once depended on freedom, the ability to move, adapt, and follow the rhythms of the land. Some modern tiny house and van life movements echo this spirit, but the tribes mastered it centuries ago. Their homes were lightweight, portable, and perfectly suited to changing environments. Could our society, so rigid and rooted in concrete, learn to be more fluid? Third, community. Inside the tipi, there was no my room or your room. Families shared one space, one fire, one circle. Privacy was rare, but connection was constant. Elders' stories flowed directly into children's ears. Traditions passed in whispers and laughter by firelight. Compare that to our modern houses, where walls isolate us and screens distract us. The tipi asks, are we warmer or are we colder in our disconnected comfort? Fourth, respect for nature. Every part of the tipi came from the land. Every hide was honored, every pole selected carefully, every fire lit with prayer. Today, we strip the earth for materials, often waste more than we use. The tipi shows another path of partnership instead of domination, a house that listens to the land instead of conquering it. And finally, spirituality. The tipi was not just a shelter, it was a universe. Every detail carried meaning, from the east-facing door to the smoke rising to the Creator. Modern homes rarely remind us of our place in the cosmos. The tipi did so every single day. Now, imagine blending ancient wisdom with modern technology. Solar panels shaped like tipi flaps, ventilation systems modeled on its breathing cone, communities built in circles, not grids. Could it be that the most advanced housing of the future will look a lot more like the tipis of the past? This is where the lesson sharpens. The Plains tribes were not primitive. They were practical visionaries. They built homes that outlasted storms, followed food, carried spirit, and wasted nothing. Compare that with our modern systems, expensive houses that trap us, heating systems that burn endless fuel, communities cut off from one another. Who is really advanced? Who really holds the blueprint for survival? So, here's the haunting thought. Maybe the tipi wasn't just a house for a people long ago. Maybe it's a mirror, showing us what we've lost, then what we still need to remember before it's too late. All through this story, we've seen the tipi as engineering, as home, as spirit. But here is the secret that few outside the tribes ever understood. The tipi was not just designed to survive winter. It was designed to control it. Think about this. Settlers froze in log cabins, struggling with drafts, collapsing roofs, and choking smoke. Yet, native families lived in portable lodges that not only kept them warm but could even be adjusted to act like ancient thermostats. The secret lay in the smoke flaps. At the very top of the tipi, two long poles controlled a pair of flaps. By shifting these with incredible precision, the inhabitants could change everything. Open them wide, and fresh air rushed in, cooling the space in summer. Angle them against the wind, and the tipi sealed tight, trapping heat inside, even as snow swirled outside. The fire at the center could burn steadily all night, its warmth held low where families slept. In effect, the tipi had climate control centuries before electricity or furnaces. And the surprise doesn't end there. The hides themselves were layered for efficiency. In the bitterest storms, some families doubled their coverings, creating insulation as effective as modern fiberglass. Snow that piled against the base actually added to the effect, acting like natural weather stripping. What looked like weakness to outsiders was strength in disguise. Then came the most shocking adaptation of all. The tipi could be collapsed in storms. When winds grew dangerously strong, some families lowered their lodges halfway, anchoring them low to the ground. Instead of fighting the storm, they bent with it, riding it out like grass in the wind. Imagine that entire house designed to surrender, not resist, and survive because of it. But the wisdom went deeper still. Placement of the camp itself was a survival art. Elders chose sites with uncanny accuracy near south-facing slopes that caught sun, in valleys shielded from wind, or beside tree lines that broke the force of storms. To outsiders, it looked like luck, but it was no accident. It was knowledge enshant, tested, and remembered. Here's the hidden truth. The tipi wasn't only a shelter. It was a philosophy, a way of saying, we will not fight the land, we will live with it, move with it, and bend with it. That's why they thrived where others perished. That's why children were born, stories were told, and generations survived winters that should have been impossible. And now ask yourself, in our world of concrete towers, electric heaters, and gas furnaces, would you survive 1 month in the frozen plains with no modern gear? Most of us would not, but they did. Not for one winter, not for one generation, but for centuries. Because their houses were not just houses. They were living survival codes, written in pole and hide, fire and smoke. So here is the awe-inspiring twist. The tipi was not a primitive tent. It was one of the most advanced survival technologies ever built by human hands. A technology we have almost forgotten yet may one day need again. We began with a question. How did Native Americans survive winters so brutal that even settlers with axes and cabins often failed? The answer was not only in the tipi's design, but in the worldview that shaped it. The tipi was more than shelter. It was a lesson. It taught that survival comes from balance, not domination. From listening, not forcing. From adapting to the land, not conquering it. Its very shape reminded families that life is a circle, that what we give returns. That storms will pass, that fire in the center is enough if we tend it with care. Think of the contrast. Today, we build homes that fight the land, steel beams against earthquakes, concrete walls against floods, air conditioners against heat. We consume resources endlessly, as if the earth is our enemy. And yet, with all our technology, we still find ourselves fragile when disasters strike. The tipi whispers another way, a way where homes breathe with the wind instead of resisting it, where warmth is made not just by fire, but by community gathered around it, where walls do not separate us from the world, but connect us to its rhythm. This is why the tipi endures not only in memory, but in spirit. It is more than a survival tool of the past. It is a mirror for us now, reflecting what we might recover if we choose to live with respect, humility, and balance. And so, as the firelight flickered on buffalo hides, as the snow howled outside, and families sat in warmth together, a truth was passed from one generation to the next. Survival is not about conquering winter. It is about remembering that we are part of the same circle as the buffalo, the wolf, the eagle, the storm, and the fire itself. So now, I leave you with this question. Could you survive even one winter in a tipi? Without electricity, without modern gear, only hides, and the wisdom of the land? If this story opened your eyes to the brilliance of native survival, share it. If you felt the fire burning in the center of that lodge, let others feel it too. And if you want to walk deeper into the myths, the history, and the hidden survival secrets of Native America, subscribe and join us by the fire. Because this isn't just history. It's a lesson we may one day need again.